Hello all, my name is Tara Malloy, and it is my distinct privilege today of being able to describe to you the work of the Campaign Legal Center, or CLC, a nonprofit, nonpartisan legal shop in DC that attempts to harness the legal expertise of its staff to protect and strengthen the democratic process. So, the official topic of my little talk is advancing democracy through law. But I've given it a little bit more thought, particularly after hearing and enjoying the kickoff speeches that we heard yesterday that exhorted us to bold, direct action, to radical steps. And I was inspired. But then I thought a little, and I also wondered if a couple words were warranted to defend a different type of approach, a perhaps complementary approach to the protection of our democracy. And it got me to a new subtitle I'd like to try out, which is CLC, Advancing Democracy, also in defense of painstakingly slow incrementalism and persnickety attention to detail. I know it's a barnstormer. The exits, I believe, are to the front and rear of this room. But the devil is in the details. And I think that democracy is in the details. Fun fact, many people have been railing against the huge dark money problem we have in this country. Did you know that you could trace pretty much the entirety of the problem back to 7 words in an obscure 2007 regulation promulgated by the FEC? And elections hang on small actions. The closure, the perhaps strategic closure of just a couple of polling places, the fine print of a state's felon disenfranchisement law. Small things matter, and so while I absolutely agree that we have to think big, I think we also have to pay attention to the small. So I've been talking about this US democratic process and how we are supposed to protect it. But what do I really mean by this? Well, let's have a little flight of imagination. We're imagining we're in a voting booth. Just imagine that incredibly long ballot that you see, multiple pages. You got some congressional candidates up top, statewide, oh my gosh, you keep going. There's a huge number of candidates for Superior Court that you've never heard of, right? So how do you make up your mind? What determines your vote? Party allegiance? I mean, you don't even know half these names. Perhaps your pet issues, environment, immigration, abortion, maybe just your gut check of the character of the candidates. But really, how many of us pull that lever based upon our comprehensive strategy for effecting structural reform of the democratic process? Well, okay, everyone here. Everyone at this conference, perhaps. You guys are the wrong audience for my hypothetical. But I don't think that most people think about the financing of elections or access to the polls or partisan redistricting when they pull the lever, and maybe that's how it should. So I think we need more than the voting booth to protect the democratic process. I think we need a strong system of laws, of regulations, of ethical norms, of cultural expectations, to make sure that the American political process is fair and accessible to all citizens. And that's kind of where the Campaign Legal Center comes in. We can't just protect things in the voting booth. We need laws. And yes, we need lawyers. Can you believe it? Yes, we need lawyers and committed citizens with attention to detail to draft the laws, to pass the laws, to defend the laws in court, to watchdog the agencies so that they implement the laws, to watchdog our elected officials so that they comply with the laws, to see how the laws work on the ground, the whole 9 yards, and that is very important to the process. So I'm going to turn quickly to a short history of the CLC, not just so I can talk about my organization, but also because I think that our evolution in some ways tracks the burgeoning attacks of all facets of the democratic process. So first, so we were founded in 2002 by Trevor Potter, and we had a pretty singular focus on campaign finance reform. In specific, the legal defense of the law that these guys passed, McCain and Feingold of 2002. To everybody's surprise, our first job, defending this law with many others, was successful, and the 2003 Supreme Court upheld it. Next, we tried to watchdog the FEC into properly interpreting and implementing this law, which is an internal task, as any of you know who have dealt with the federal election official, or FEC. But our work did not stop there. Our roots were campaign finance, but we quickly evolved to pay attention to different issues. First, we started with money and politics at the federal level, but as you all know, the money doesn't stop at the federal level. It's trickled down to every single race in America, school boards, county executives, you name it. So it's necessary to look at the entire panoply of elections. Most importantly, Congress is in also complete perpetual gridlock. States, by necessity, not just through idealism, have to become the laboratories of democracy. So we moved to state and local. We looked at political disclosure. You know, I've actually been at this long enough that I remember when political disclosure was a consensus bipartisan issue. In fact, we were told over and over, we only need disclosure, forget about the rest of your reforms. Well, now it's under relentless attack. It's really, I think, Citizens United was a turning point. There, as you know, the Supreme Court struck down long-standing restrictions on expenditures in elections. But apparently, the corporations and the big donors don't just want to spend copiously, they want to spend anonymously. And so the federal laws requiring disclosure, as well as the political disclosure laws of at least 24 states have come under attack, legal attack, in the last 2 decades. And in fact, right now, we're pretty much involved in litigation in every single federal appellate circuit in the nation about this consensus, prior consensus issue. Another one, voting rights. Again, you know, it's not really a new issue, access to the polls, but it's one that's come under increasing attack, and our program is growing. In 2013, in particular, the Supreme Court gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. This required covered jurisdictions to pre-clear or get approval of any voting changes. And surprise to no one but the Supreme Court, once Section 5 was gutted, we saw a flood of discriminatory laws. And the problem is that the only way to really check them is in court. So that is what the CLC is trying to do. For instance, one challenge we have is to Texas's strict voter identification law, a voter identification law that would disfranchise 600,000 Texans. Luckily, the litigation so far has blocked it from being in effect, but we still litigate that. Another challenge is to Alabama's felon disenfranchisement law. That has stripped 280,000 Alabama citizens of the right to vote. We've cleared the motion to dismiss, and it's going to trial in May, so wish us luck. Another issue, redistricting. You probably heard from our great litigator, Paul Smith, about our battle about Gil v. Whitford at the Supreme Court. But of course, partisan gerrymandering has a long, sordid history. It's not new. But again, it's getting exponentially worse, aided by ever-improving software and technology for drawing districts, aided by the complete acquiescence of the courts. And so we're here in the court arguing for a manageable standard, the standard that Justice Kennedy has demanded if he's going to regulate this area. And we hope, indeed, that the Supreme Court can be persuaded to end what Paul Smith calls the festival of gerrymandering that's absolutely undermining the bedrock principle of one person, one vote. So that's a really happy story, but I'm coming to a happy ending, hopefully. So yeah, the basic processes that structure democracy are under attack, from campaign finance, political disclosure, redistricting, voting rights, and it's not just big things, it's little things. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And the public is not unaware of this. I think that it's well summed up by a recent poll, their views of the New York Times. They were asked, you know, so do we need to stop or change the financing of our elections? And 100%, literally everybody said, yes, we need changes. The one big dispute was whether we have merely fundamental change or instead a complete overhaul. Another little snapshot is this sort of sad, jagged path downward of historic trust in government. We're at pretty much a historic low at that red arrow. Only 18% of Americans believe that Washington, D.C. government will do the right thing some or most of the time. In short, this is a time that process desperately matters. So where do we go from here? I've taken us down low, and unfortunately, much as I might like to, I cannot describe my 44-point plan for democracy reform. I only have 1 minute and 20 seconds, but I'm just going to leave everybody with a quote from Wendell Phillips. The phrase, "eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." And the second half of that quote, which I was not aware of until recently, which is, "Power is forever stealing from the many to the few." So I like this phrase as a detail-oriented lawyer. I like that it pays attention to paying attention. And I think it sort of shows a route forward. We can't all mount the ramparts, perhaps, but I think we can all pay attention to how we structure the democratic process and ensure that the abuses of the powerful are checked and that there's opportunity for all to really participate in our democracy. CLC was founded to do this work, but of course it's work that needs the care of attention of all. And vigilance of the many is really the only protection of a democracy for all. So think big, act small, pay attention to the small, and if you need a lawyer, here's our information. Thank you very much.